Daniel never planned on becoming the center of neighborhood gossip. He was the kind of man who walked with quiet steps, who liked to live in the background of his own life. At 32, he worked remotely as a software developer, spent most evenings alone with a simple meal and a show, and visited his grandfather's old property whenever he needed to breathe. That lot, an empty, quiet piece of land at the edge of a carefully controlled HOA neighborhood, was the only thing that truly felt like his. It wasn't much to other people. Just a rectangle of earth, a few scraggly wildflowers, and a crooked old oak tree that leaned like it was tired of standing. But to Daniel, it was a promise. His grandfather had always said, "One day, when life settles down, this land will be your peace." So Daniel held onto that dream, even when everything else felt uncertain. The HOA community that wrapped around his land like a polished necklace was another story. Perfect lawns with strict edges, matching mailboxes, flower beds that looked copied and pasted across every house. It was beautiful from a distance, but up close it felt rehearsed, like everyone was acting in a show they didn't remember agreeing to be in. The homeowners association controlled everything. The color of your front door, the kind of flowers you planted, the type of fence you were allowed to have. If your trash bins stayed out for too long, you got a letter. If your grass grew half an inch too high, you got another one. People whispered about fines, threats, meetings where voices were raised and smiles were fake. And at the center of it all stood Karen. Karen wasn't just on the HOA board. She was the HOA board, at least in attitude. She was in her late 40s, thin and sharp, always in pressed clothes and a tight ponytail that never had a hair out of place. She walked around the neighborhood with a clipboard like a patrol officer, constantly checking on things, as she'd say. She believed deeply in standards and community image, words that might have sounded good if they didn't come with so much control and judgment. Neighbors talked about how she'd forced someone to repaint their house because the shade of beige was too warm, and how she'd made an elderly couple remove a bird feeder because it attracted messy wildlife. People smiled at her from their driveways, waved from their porches, and talked about her the second she was gone. Daniel knew of her more than he knew her. He'd seen her at meetings his grandfather dragged him to years ago, before the old man passed away. Back then, his grandfather would sit with his arms crossed while Karen spoke about new rules and regulations, her voice firm and always just a little too loud. Afterwards, he would lean over and say in a low voice, "That woman loves rules more than she loves people." Daniel would laugh, thinking it was just a joke. At the time, the lot was still just future plans, and he didn't care much about any of it. After his grandfather's death, though, the lot felt different. It wasn't just land. It was the last thread tying him to the man who had believed in him when nobody else did. Daniel visited it more often, standing at the edge of the road, hands in his pockets, imagining what it might become one day. A small, cozy house with a porch, a garden where nothing had to be approved by a committee, a life where he could breathe without worrying about whether his lawn matched his neighbor's. Whenever he stood there, he felt something like relief wash over him. This was his. His grandfather had left him the deed, the papers, everything clean and official. The HOA had no control over it because technically, the lot wasn't part of their development. It was like a stubborn, quiet piece of land that refused to be absorbed. Months passed like that. Work, home, quiet dinners, and occasional visits to the lot. Sometimes he would bring a folding chair and sit under the crooked oak, listening to distant lawnmowers and cars humming by. Sometimes a neighbor walking their dog would glance at him, and then at the empty land, curiosity flickering in their eyes. One older man even stopped once, gave him a nod, and asked, "Ever gonna build something there?" Daniel had just smiled and said, "One day." The man smiled back as if he liked that answer and kept walking. But the HOA didn't like "one day." It liked structure, plans, order. Empty land to them looked like wasted potential, an unpolished piece of the perfect picture they were trying to create. Karen, especially, seemed to dislike anything that didn't fit into her neat little boxes. And as time went by, Daniel started to notice her looking at the lot whenever she drove past. At first, it was just quick glances from behind her sunglasses. Then she started slowing down, staring for a little longer as if she was trying to solve a problem. The lot bothered her. He could feel it. One afternoon, as Daniel sat with his laptop at a cafe, answering emails and fixing bugs, his phone vibrated. It was a message from an unfamiliar number with a formal tone. "Hello, this is Karen from the HOA. I'd like to discuss the vacant lot at the end of Willowbrook Lane. Please respond at your earliest convenience." He stared at the message for a moment, his heartbeat picking up for no logical reason. He typed back, "Hi, this is Daniel. The lot belongs to me. What would you like to discuss?" Her reply came quickly. "It would be better to speak in person. Are you available this week for a brief meeting?" The words felt cold, like a notice rather than an invitation. Reluctantly, he agreed to meet her the next morning. They met at the corner of the street where the manicured neighborhood met his wild, quiet lot. Karen stood waiting, clipboard in hand, sunglasses on, her posture straight as a board. "Daniel," she said with a tight smile, "thank you for coming." He nodded and stuffed his hands in his jacket pockets. "Sure, what's this about?" She turned to look at the land with a critical eye, as if she was judging an unfinished painting. "This property has been sitting vacant for quite some time," she began. "As you know, this community values appearances and property value. An unused lot can be problematic." Daniel frowned. "Problematic how? It's not messy. I keep it clean enough. And it's not part of the HOA, right?" She gave a small, dismissive laugh. "Technically, no, but it affects the aesthetic of the whole neighborhood. Potential buyers drive by and see this empty space. It doesn't look managed, it looks forgotten." Her tone made the word sound almost offensive. He shrugged. "It was my grandfather's. I'm not ready to build yet. When I can, I will." She tilted her head slightly, still staring at the land. "There are options," she said calmly. "The HOA could help guide development, or the land could be sold to someone who's ready to use it. We have interested parties." Her meaning was clear. She wanted it under control. Daniel felt a quiet stubbornness rise in his chest. "I'm not selling," he said softly but firmly. "Not now, maybe not ever. It's not just a lot, it's family." For a second, something flickered in her expression, annoyance maybe, or disbelief. Then the tight smile returned. "Of course," she said in a tone that didn't match the words. "It's your decision. I just wanted to open the conversation." They parted with polite words, but the air felt heavy. As Daniel walked back to his car, he felt an uneasiness sit in his stomach, a quiet warning. Life went back to its comfortable rhythm for a while after that. Days became weeks. No more messages from Karen, no more conversations about the lot. Daniel relaxed, telling himself he was overthinking it. Maybe she'd accepted his decision. Maybe the HOA had moved on to other problems like uneven hedges and mismatched garden gnomes. The land stayed the same, quiet, patient. He visited less frequently as work got busy. Deadlines piled up, meetings stretched longer, and nights blurred into one another. Then, one early Saturday morning, everything changed. Daniel woke up earlier than usual with an odd restlessness tugging at him. The sun was just starting to rise, painting the sky with pale orange and soft pink. On impulse, he decided to drive out to the lot, just to sit there for a while, to clear his head before the day really began. He grabbed his keys, slipped into a hoodie, and drove through the sleepy streets. As he turned onto Willowbrook Lane, he frowned. The street was busier than normal for that hour. There were trucks parked along the curb, big white ones with company logos on the side. He saw men in hard hats walking around, carrying beams, loud voices cutting through the morning hush. His heart started beating faster, his fingers tightening around the steering wheel. Something was wrong. As he got closer, his breath caught in his throat. Where his quiet, empty lot used to be, the ground was no longer untouched. The soil had been disturbed, flattened, marked. Wooden stakes outlined shapes in the dirt, and heavy machinery stood where wildflowers once grew. Workers were moving with purpose, shouting measurements, setting up. And in the middle of it all, standing with her arms crossed, a clipboard in hand and a look of satisfied control on her face, was Karen. For a long, stunned moment, Daniel just sat in his car, watching the scene like it was happening in a different reality. He blinked, hoping he was misreading something. Maybe this was a mistake. Maybe they were working on the house next door and it only looked like they were on his land. But then he saw it clearly. The crooked oak tree at the edge of the lot, now wrapped with bright tape, as if waiting to be cut down. The stakes running across the center of the property. The concrete markers at the corners. This wasn't a simple error. Someone was building on his land. Daniel stepped out of his car slowly, almost as if any sudden movement might break the illusion and reveal that this was all some early morning hallucination. But the cold bite of the morning air grounded him back into reality. Voices echoed, machinery hummed, and boots crunched over his land. His land, the one place that had always belonged solely to him. The sight stole the breath from his lungs. He started walking toward the chaos, his mind racing with questions that had no answers. How had this happened? Who gave permission? Why hadn't anyone told him? The closer he got, the louder everything became, the clanking of metal, the buzz of drills, the barked orders from supervisors. It felt like a nightmare playing in broad daylight. A construction worker in an orange vest nearly bumped into him while carrying a bundle of boards. "Hey, watch your step," the man warned briskly, clearly stressed and too busy to pay attention to Daniel's stunned expression. This is my land," Daniel tried to say, his voice shaky. But the man had already moved on. A rising panic smothered his chest as he walked closer to the center of the activity. And then he saw her. Karen, standing near a freshly dug foundation line, clipboard tucked under one arm, giving instructions with the calm confidence of someone who believed she owned everything her eyes landed on. It was the same expression she always wore, controlled, satisfied, and a little too sharp. Daniel swallowed hard as he approached her. "Karen," he called out, louder than he expected. She turned sharply at the sound of her name, eyes narrowing when she recognized him. She didn't look surprised. Annoyed, maybe, inconvenienced. "Oh," she said, as if he'd arrived early to a party she hadn't invited him to. "Daniel, you're here." Her tone wasn't welcoming. It was tight, impatient. "What is going on?" he asked, breathless. "Why are there workers on my land? What are you doing?" Karen exhaled a dramatic sigh, the kind reserved for someone explaining something painfully obvious to a child. "We're beginning construction," she said simply. "The community approved plans for a new home here, a much-needed improvement if you ask me." Daniel stared at her, stunned. "A home on my land." The words tasted sour in his mouth. Karen's jaw tightened, as if she had been waiting for this moment. "This area has been underutilized for far too long, Daniel. The HOA believes strongly in maintaining a cohesive appearance throughout the neighborhood. Leaving this lot empty was dragging down the value of nearby properties." Daniel's heart thundered. "You don't own this land," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "You can't just decide to build on it, you know that." Her smile was thin and cold. "I'm aware you claim ownership, yes. But the lot has remained in a state of disuse for years, according to HOA bylaws." "This lot isn't under HOA jurisdiction," he cut in sharply. Her face twitched, irritation breaking through her polished composure. "Not officially," she admitted slowly, "but it's adjacent to our community and affects property value. The board determined that action needed to be taken." He felt the world tilting around him. "Action," he echoed. "Action means constructing an entire house without my permission?" "Plans were posted," she said, flipping through her clipboard as if the papers contained some magical authority. "Notices were sent, meetings were held, decisions were made." "I received nothing," Daniel snapped. "Not a single letter, email, call, nothing." Karen hesitated for half a second, just enough for guilt to flicker in her eyes. "Well," she finally said, clearing her throat, "perhaps there was a clerical error." The way she said it made it sound like she didn't consider it her problem. Daniel took a step closer, his anger simmering beneath the confusion. "Stop this. Right now," he said firmly. "Tell them to pack up. This is illegal." Karen's expression hardened. "You're overreacting. The work has already started. Contracts have been signed, and frankly, you should be grateful. When the project is complete, this area will look significantly better." Daniel felt his stomach drop. "Grateful? You built on my land without asking me?" She pressed her lips into a thin line, her patience vanishing. "Daniel, don't make this harder than it needs to be. The community expects this house to be built. Undermining the project now would be extremely inconvenient. Let the process continue, and we can discuss compensation later." Compensation. The word sliced through him, infuriating and absurd. This wasn't a simple mistake. This wasn't miscommunication. This was a calculated takeover. He stared at her, realizing she wasn't apologizing because she didn't feel she had done anything wrong. In her mind, she had acted for the greater good, and Daniel's personal rights were a minor inconvenience, something she believed she could smooth over with a check and a smile. Construction continued behind them, loud and relentless. Workers were digging into the ground, destroying soil that Daniel had quietly cherished for years. Someone was marking spots where concrete foundation would be poured. Another was trimming branches of the crooked oak, his grandfather's tree, without hesitation. Daniel felt a sudden burst of emotion rise in him, not just anger but grief, insult, violation. That land was memory, history, and hope. And now strangers were ripping into it like it was nothing but brunch plans and blueprint decisions. He turned back to Karen, voice trembling with fury. "You're trespassing, every one of you. Stop this now or I'll call the police." Karen's eyes flashed with something sharp and condescending. "Please do," she said coolly. We have all the necessary permits and documentation." She held out the clipboard like a shield. Daniel snatched the papers from her hands before she could pull back. He flipped through them quickly: building plans, HOA approvals, architectural sketches, contractor agreements. But none of them had his signature. None had his name. None acknowledged the true owner of the land. "This is fraud," he said, voice low. "These documents don't include me at all." Karen straightened her spine. "We didn't need your involvement. The HOA has full authority to act in the community's interest." "It's not your community," he shot back. "This lot is outside your control." She lifted her chin. "Not for long." Those 4 words chilled him. Not for long. What did that even mean? Before he could respond, one of the workers shouted over the noise. "Ma'am, should we remove this tree or keep it for later?" Daniel felt a surge of dread. The oak, Karen didn't even turn. "Cut it. It doesn't match the landscape design." Something in Daniel snapped. "No," he exploded, running toward the tree. "Don't touch that." Workers froze. Karen's eyebrows lifted, a smirk tugging at the corner of her mouth as if she enjoyed watching him crumble. Daniel stood in front of the tree, chest heaving, hands shaking. "You're not cutting this," he said. "You're not building anything. Everyone leaves, now." Silence fell over the area. Workers looked at each other, unsure. Karen stepped forward, voice dangerously calm. "Daniel, you are making a scene. Step aside." He didn't move. "It's not your land," she repeated coldly, but she was wrong. And Daniel realized then this wasn't going to be a conversation, it was going to be a battle. A long, exhausting, expensive battle he never asked for. But he wasn't backing down, not now. Not after what they had already taken, not after what they were trying to steal. He kept his ground, the wind stirring around him, the morning sun rising behind the oak like a silent witness. This was just the beginning. For the next minute, the construction site remained frozen in an uneasy silence. Workers looked to Karen for direction, their confusion hanging in the air like dust. Some had paused mid-step. Others rested their tools, clearly uncomfortable with the tension mounting between Daniel and the HOA's self-appointed queen. But Karen's eyes were sharp with irritation, as if Daniel's resistance was nothing more than an inconvenience standing in the way of her perfectly structured plans. "Everyone take a break," she finally said, lifting her hand with forced composure. "I'll handle this." The workers exchanged awkward glances, eager to escape the conflict, before scattering toward their trucks or water coolers. Daniel remained standing protectively in front of the oak tree, heart and breath uneven but resolve firm. His palms stung from clenching his fists, yet the adrenaline running through him made him feel strangely steady. Karen approached him with slow, deliberate steps, her heels sinking lightly into the disturbed soil. "Daniel, you need to calm down," she said softly, too softly, like she was talking to a frightened child instead of a grown man defending the last tangible memory of his family. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." "Harder," he repeated, voice raw. "You broke onto my land, you ordered people to destroy my grandfather's tree. You're acting like you own something that's never belonged to you. Harder." "Karen, you haven't even seen hard yet." Her jaw tightened. For the first time, her mask cracked, revealing annoyance that simmered beneath her collected exterior. "You don't understand the larger picture," she insisted. "This community needs cohesion. A new property here will raise values for everyone. We're doing you a favor, a big one." Daniel stared at her in disbelief. "A favor would have been knocking on my door. A favor would have been respecting the deed. A favor would have been asking, but you didn't ask. You decided, for me. Without me," her lips pressed into a thin line. "You are being emotional. This is a project the HOA approved months ago. You should have been involved." "I was never notified," he snapped. "That's not my fault." "You rarely attend meetings," she countered, her voice sharp with accusation. "Because my land isn't under your HOA?" Daniel fired back. "I'm not part of your rules or your board." Karen inhaled sharply, as though she hated being reminded of that detail. She turned away from him and surveyed the construction area with stiff shoulders. "We all want what's best for the neighborhood," she finally said. "You holding onto unused land is selfish. And without progress, the lot becomes an eyesore." Selfish. Eyesore. Words she delivered with the confidence of someone who had never been questioned and fully believed she was right. It struck Daniel then. This woman truly didn't think she had done anything wrong. She had manipulated paperwork, contacted builders, approved designs, and redirected funds so confidently that she likely believed the entire neighborhood's opinions outweighed one man's property rights. To her, the HOA's decisions were law, moral, and otherwise. Daniel exhaled shakily and stepped away from the tree. "You need to stop the project." he said quietly but firmly. If you don't, I'll get the authorities involved. Karen turned back to him slowly, her expression shifting into something smug. Authorities, she echoed, amusement dripping from the word. Go ahead, call whoever you want. The HOA has documentation, we have contractors, we've invested money, and we have community support. She took a step closer, lowering her voice. Do you? Her implication was clear, he was alone. In her mind, the HOA was a giant, an unstoppable institution backed by wealthy homeowners, strict bylaws, and legal gray areas she'd learned to exploit. Daniel was just one man with a deed and a tree. She believed she could intimidate him into surrender. But she didn't know Daniel, not really. He'd lived a quiet life, yes. A small life, maybe, but that life had not made him weak. It had made him observant, patient, resilient. A man who doesn't speak often learns how to think before he acts. And the quiet ones, when pushed too far, often rise with a strength that surprises everyone. I'll be back, he said with deadly calm. Karen raised an eyebrow. With what? More complaints. The board has already moved forward. Daniel didn't answer. He turned, walked past her, and headed to his car. As he walked away, Karen called out behind him, You're only delaying the inevitable. This home will be built. He didn't turn back. He didn't need to. He had heard her loud and clear. But she had no idea she had just made the biggest mistake of her life. When Daniel reached his car, he leaned against the door, letting his head hang as he tried to breathe through the shaking. His hands trembled with anger and fear. He wasn't built for conflict, not the loud, messy kind that demanded yelling and police and lawyers. But he also wasn't built to let people take advantage of him. His grandfather had raised him to stand tall against those who tried to bend others with pressure and power. He slid into his car and pulled out his phone. He didn't call the police yet. He knew better. This wasn't just trespassing. This was property theft disguised as community improvement. He needed proof, documentation, legal clarity. Evidence that the HOA had overstepped. He began taking photos from his window, workers on his land, machinery digging, construction materials placed directly on the surveyed property. He filmed the stakes placed around the lot and captured the tape wrapped around the oak. He recorded the boundary lines he remembered vividly from his grandfather's stories. He photographed Karen's shiny black SUV parked confidently at the edge of the mess. He documented everything. When he was done, he drove straight to the county property office. The building was old, with peeling paint and the faint smell of paper and dust. Behind a tall counter sat a tired-looking clerk flipping through forms. Hi, Daniel began, his voice shaky but controlled. I need a copy of the deed to my land. Name? The clerk asked. Daniel Price, he said. Willowbrook Lane, parcel ending in 372. The clerk typed on an old keyboard, squinting at the screen. After a moment, she said, Found it, and printed out a clean copy from the system. Daniel exhaled in relief. He held the deed in his hands, running his eyes over the official signatures, dates, and boundaries. It was all there. His grandfather's name, then his own, properly transferred and recorded. No mistakes, no loopholes. The land was his. He felt something inside him harden, like a line had been drawn and he was finally crossing it. Excuse me, he said softly to the clerk. If someone builds something on my land without my consent, what happens? She looked up, blinking in confusion. Without your consent, then it belongs to you. Everything on your land is yours, legally speaking. His pulse quickened. Even if they paid for it, especially if they paid for it, she said, that's their mistake for building on property they don't own. Daniel swallowed a breath. A free mansion, and the HOA didn't even know it. He walked out of the building with certainty burning through him. He wasn't just going to stop the construction. He was going to let Karen finish building the entire home. And then, he'd take the keys. When Daniel returned to the lot later that afternoon, the workers had resumed construction. Noise filled the air again, but something else hung there too, tension. Several workers glanced at him, whispering quietly, unsure of who he was. A few nodded respectfully. Some looked worried. Karen stood near the foundation markers, talking to the lead contractor with exaggerated confidence, but Daniel could tell she was nervous. He approached calmly, deed in hand. Karen stiffened when she saw him. Back so soon? She asked with a brittle smile. Daniel held up the document. This is the deed to the land you're building on, he said clearly, projecting his voice so the nearby workers could hear. This is legally mine, and anything built on this land becomes mine. The contractor's eyebrows shot up. He turned to Karen. Ma'am, is this true? Karen's face drained of color. He's trying to intimidate us. Don't listen to him. Daniel shook his head. I'm not intimidating anyone, I'm informing you. Everything you build here will belong to me. You're constructing a home for me for free. The workers exchanged stunned looks. The contractor ran a hand over his face. Ma'am, is his name on the deed? Karen snapped. The HOA has authority here. Daniel stepped forward, voice low but powerful. Not over me, not over this land. And when this house is finished, I will be the owner. Karen's eyes went wild, fear, rage, confusion, all tangled together. Daniel smiled, calm, confident, unbothered. For the first time, Karen looked powerless. You said. The weeks that followed transformed Daniel's once quiet life into a whirlwind of noise, tension, and silent victories. Every day, as the sun rose over Willowbrook Lane, the construction crew returned, hammering, drilling, lifting, shouting, turning the once empty plot of land into the skeleton of a luxury mansion. And every day, Daniel made it a point to appear, calmly observing the progress from the sidewalk, hands tucked into his pockets, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. It drove Karen insane. At first, she pretended not to notice him. She brushed past him with a fake smile that never reached her eyes, talked loudly about community improvement, and attempted to intimidate the workers with her constant micromanaging. But the more the house grew, the more her confidence cracked. Daniel's presence was a reminder of the mistake she refused to acknowledge, a mistake that threatened to cost her more than reputation. Daniel stood there like a quiet shadow, watching walls rise, beams being placed, and rooms take shape. It was surreal. The mansion looked nothing like the cozy little home he'd once imagined building with his own hands. This was big. Too big, a place with modern architecture, massive windows, a sweeping porch, and a layout meant to impress wealthy buyers, not a single, quiet man who had only wanted a peaceful space to honor his grandfather. But still, it was his. Legally his, permanently his. And that truth gave him a deep, steady satisfaction he had never expected to feel. The workers, once confused, had grown used to seeing him. Some even became friendly. They would nod to him in the mornings, greet him with small smiles, and offer updates about the build. One foreman, an older man with weathered hands and a kind voice, walked up to him one afternoon and said, "You'll like this place when it's done. It's a $1 million house." Daniel chuckled softly and said, "Yeah, so I've heard." The foreman didn't know the full story, but he must have sensed something was off. "You the owner?" he asked casually one day. Daniel paused, glanced at Karen arguing with another contractor, and nodded. "Yes," he said simply, "I am." The foreman smiled with genuine warmth. "Then we'll make it perfect." Daniel appreciated the sentiment, even though he knew the mansion wasn't being built for him, not intentionally. But with each beam nailed in place, with each tile laid, with each window installed, it was becoming something he was growing emotionally attached to. Not because he'd chosen it, but because it was becoming a symbol of something far bigger. His grandfather's legacy protected, his rights respected, and Karen's arrogance exposed. Meanwhile, the neighborhood buzzed with whispers. People walked their dogs slower past the site, eyes darting between Daniel and the construction crew. Some nodded to him sympathetically, others avoided eye contact as if afraid to be pulled into the drama. A few curious neighbors even approached him when Karen wasn't around. A middle-aged woman pushing a stroller stopped one morning. "Is it true?" she whispered. "Is that your land?" Daniel nodded, her eyes widened. "Oh my goodness, Karen told everyone the HOA had acquired it." Daniel chuckled at the lie. "Not true." The woman glanced nervously over her shoulder. "She's been telling people there was a misunderstanding, that you're being difficult." Daniel offered a polite smile. "People will believe what they want." Another neighbor, a man in his 60s, leaned over his fence one afternoon and said, "Good for you, son. That woman's been pushing people around for years. About time someone pushed back." A quiet alliance formed between Daniel and the silently watching neighborhood. They weren't ready to confront Karen themselves. She'd ruled the HOA with fear too long, but they rooted for him in small ways. A nod, a whispered word, a supportive glance Karen noticed, and it made her burn. Every time she saw Daniel chatting with someone, her eyes turned icy, her walk became snappier, her voice harsher. The tension between them thickened with every new brick laid. She refused to stop construction. She refused to admit fault. She refused to even acknowledge the growing mansion was legally Daniel's. Denial, arrogance, and desperation fueled her actions. One afternoon, Daniel arrived to find Karen red-faced and arguing with the lead architect. Her voice was sharp, brittle, on the verge of breaking. "We need to finish faster," she demanded. "We're behind schedule. I want double shifts." The architect pushed up his glasses, visibly frustrated. We're already working fast. Rushing more will compromise safety. I don't care about safety, she snapped, then immediately forced a smile as she realized people were watching. I mean, of course, safety is important, but the timeline must be met. Daniel didn't say a word, but his presence behind her made her shoulders stiffen. She spun around, her fake smile plastered back into place. Daniel, she greeted through clenched teeth. Lovely to see you again. Always a pleasure, he said calmly, her nostrils flared. Why do you insist on being here every day? I like watching my house being built, he replied. She glared. It's not your house. It's on my land. That will be resolved soon. How? Daniel asked, crossing his arms. Going to magically rewrite county property laws? She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. Her silence was louder than any argument she could have made. Eventually, she stormed off, barking orders at workers already doing their best. But as she walked away, Daniel noticed something new: panic. It had settled behind her eyes like a shadow she couldn't shake off. As the mansion neared completion, Karen grew more frantic. She scheduled late-night meetings with the HOA. She sent contractors long email lists of urgent requests. She even tried convincing the county inspector that Daniel's deed was outdated, which earned her a stern warning for making false claims. Yet construction remained unstoppable. Daniel's quiet presence had become a psychological weapon, one he hadn't intended to wield but now used with deliberate ease. All he had to do was stand there, hands in his pockets, and watch the mansion rise. It was driving Karen mad. One dusk evening, as the sun dipped low and workers packed up their tools, Karen approached Daniel with a stack of folders pressed tightly against her chest. Her expression was brittle, stretched thin like a thread about to snap. "We need to talk," she said stiffly. "I'm listening," he replied. She inhaled deeply, attempting a diplomatic tone. "I propose we negotiate. I can offer you a sum, fair compensation for the land. You sell it to the HOA and things go back to normal. No fights. No drama." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "How much?" She hesitated. 200,000, he almost laughed. The half-built mansion already exceeded $1 million in materials and labor, and she was offering him a fraction of that. "No," he said simply. Karen's composure wavered. "Fine, 300. "No," her jaw twitched. 500,000. "No." She looked like she wanted to scream. Her voice dropped dangerously low. "Then what do you want?" Daniel stepped closer calmly. "I want you to finish building the mansion exactly the way you planned, every detail, every luxury, every expensive fixture. And then when it's done, you will hand over the keys." Her face blanched as if someone had drained the color from it. "That's ridiculous," she whispered. "That's reality," he said. "You're stealing. You built it on my land." She shook her head violently. "This is unfair. You didn't contribute anything," he shrugged. "Not my problem." Karen's breathing grew unsteady. "I'm not giving you a mansion. The community invested too much." Daniel tilted his head slightly. "Then maybe you should have checked the property lines before building." Her lips parted, but no sound came. The truth was undeniable. Karen had dug her own grave, foundation and all, and Daniel was about to inherit the entire mansion. The next morning, Karen didn't show up to the construction site. Instead, 2 HOA members arrived, nervous, sweating, unprepared. They asked Daniel questions he knew Karen had put them up to. "Are you sure you won't sell? Can we compensate you through community funds? Would you consider a joint ownership agreement? Could you donate the land to the HOA for tax benefits?" To each desperate attempt, Daniel calmly answered, "No." The mansion continued rising, tall, proud, elegant. By the 7-week mark, the exterior was nearly finished. It glowed in the sunlight, modern and expensive. Neighbors slowed their cars to admire it. Workers talked proudly about the high-end materials used. The inspector noted it as one of the biggest projects in the area, and every inch of it belonged to Daniel. Karen, meanwhile, was unraveling quietly. She had stopped walking the neighborhood, stopped patrolling with her clipboard, stopped showing up at HOA meetings except to slam folders on the table and argue until her voice cracked. Her confidence had turned to desperation, then to fear, and finally, resentment. But she still hadn't accepted the truth. She still hadn't surrendered the fight. She still believed she could find a way out. Daniel knew she was planning something. He could see it in the way she avoided eye contact, the way she clutched her files tighter, the way she whispered urgently to her board members. She was too proud to give up, too arrogant to admit defeat, too desperate to let millions slip through her fingers. Daniel knew the war wasn't over, but the mansion was almost finished. And the day the final tile was placed, The real showdown would begin. By the time the mansion neared its final phase, Willowbrook Lane felt like a stage where everyone waited for the final act. The house stood tall now, a towering symbol of luxury with floor-to-ceiling windows, a grand front porch, stone accents, and a sweeping driveway made of imported tiles. At night, the property glowed with warm construction lights, and even half-finished, it looked more impressive than anything else in the neighborhood. Daniel stood across the street every evening, watching as lights flickered inside the near-complete structure. He wasn't celebrating yet. He was patient, quiet, and calculating. Every day he watched the house rise, he felt more certain, more grounded, more ready for whatever Karen had planned next. Because Karen was not done. Not by a long shot. Her silence over the last few days was not peace. It was the calm before a storm. The HOA begins to crack inside the neighborhood, the tension spread like wildfire. Neighbors had been whispering for weeks, but now the whispers turned into murmurs and murmurs into full-blown gossip. People stopped pretending everything was normal. They spoke openly about Karen's mistakes, questioned her leadership, and exchanged looks every time she drove by in her black SUV, her jaw clenched so tightly it looked painful. Some neighbors avoided her, others glared. The HOA board had begun to fracture under the pressure. Daniel heard from the foreman that 2 board members had resigned quietly, not wanting their names tied to a massive legal disaster. Another had demanded an emergency audit to review Karen's paperwork. A fourth had stopped answering her calls completely. The empire she ruled for years with iron rules and fake politeness was crumbling. Daniel saw less of Karen each week. Her usual confident strut was replaced with anxious movements, her clipped tone replaced with frantic questions to contractors. Are we on schedule? Can we finish faster? Can the windows be installed tonight? Why is the driveway not done yet? She paced like someone racing a clock only she could see. She knew time was running out. Daniel Prepares forewore Daniel didn't sit idle. He wasn't naive enough to assume things would simply go his way because the law was on his side. People like Karen didn't surrender. They plotted. So he armed himself with knowledge. He met with a property lawyer, a calm, sharp woman named Abigail who listened to his entire story without interrupting. When Daniel was done, she sat back and said, "You're not just on the right side of this. You're holding every winning card." "Karen thinks she can overpower me with the HOA," Daniel said. "She can't," Abigail replied. "She built a house on land she didn't own. That's a self-inflicted disaster. What can she do?" "She'll try things," Abigail said. "She might file complaints, contest deeds, fabricate issues, or try to get the HOA to pressure you, but none of it holds legal weight. The house belongs to the landowner. That's the law." Daniel nodded slowly. "And when the house is done," Abigail gave him a small grin, "you walk in and change the locks." He felt a surge of power he hadn't felt in years. "But be careful," she added. "Cornered people do reckless things." Daniel knew that. He knew Karen's pride was broken, and broken pride made people unpredictable. The HOA meeting one evening, Daniel received a letter, ironically delivered by a trembling board member instead of Karen herself, informing him of an urgent mandatory HOA meeting. He wasn't part of the HOA, so their attempt to drag him into one was laughably illegal, but he decided to attend anyway. He wanted to see Karen try to face what she had done. The community hall buzzed with tension when he entered. Folding chairs were packed with neighbors, some leaning forward eagerly, others whispering, all staring toward the front table where Karen sat stiffly with the remaining board members. Her hair was messier than usual, her face pale, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. When Daniel took a seat, a quiet ripple of energy spread through the room. Karen cleared her throat, trying to regain control. "Thank you all for coming," she began, voice trembling. "We have an issue of grave importance to discuss." "Your issue," someone muttered loudly. People chuckled. Karen flinched. She shot a glare toward the audience. "Regarding the new construction on Willowbrook Lane." "That's Daniel's land," a woman interrupted. Karen's eye twitched. "The property was believed to be under HOA jurisdiction." "It wasn't," the older man from before said firmly. Karen clenched her clipboard. "The HOA approved a community project without checking land ownership," someone shouted. Karen snapped. "I had reason to believe the land was unclaimed." Daniel stood slowly. "You had reason to believe, or you assumed, because I have the deed, I've always had it." The room erupted into murmurs and side conversations. Karen's composure shattered. "You weren't using the land," she cried desperately. "It was empty, just sitting there, bringing down the neighborhood. So you stole it." Daniel asked calmly. Gasps filled the hall. Karen's voice cracked. I didn't steal anything. I was trying to improve the community. You were trying to control it, Daniel corrected. Like always. She stumbled back, flustered. I did everything by the book. One board member finally spoke, nervously flipping through papers. Actually, Karen, you didn't. We checked. Several approvals were forged under other names. The room fell silent. Karen's eyes widened in horror. I only did what was necessary. You committed fraud, the board member said weakly, and put the entire HOA at risk. Karen screamed, voice sharp and hysterical. The house is mine. I deserve it. I built it. I managed it. It's on my land, Daniel said firmly, which makes it my house. Karen broke. Her composure, her confidence, her entire sense of control. She slumped back into her chair, breathing hard, eyes wild and unfocused. The board whispered among themselves, then announced the inevitable. Karen, you are hereby removed from the HOA board effective immediately. Applause erupted. Cheers echoed across the hall. People who had lived in fear of Karen's rules for years felt liberation wash through the room. Karen sat frozen, mascara streaking down her cheeks, shaking her head as if refusing to accept the reality she had created. Daniel didn't gloat, he didn't smirk. He simply turned and walked out of the hall, knowing the war was nearly over. Nearly. Not quite. The final days of construction, the mansion reached completion with surprising speed after Karen's removal. Without her frantic micromanaging, the workers moved efficiently and calmly. They installed polished hardwood floors, elegant staircases, granite countertops, recessed lighting, and custom fixtures that looked straight out of a luxury home magazine. Every day Daniel visited, he felt the weight of what was coming, and so did Karen. She began appearing again, standing across the street, staring at the mansion with hollow eyes, not yelling anymore, not arguing, just staring. Her face was empty, like the fight had drained her entire soul. Neighbors ignored her. Some avoided her. Others whispered loudly within earshot. That's the woman who built a house on the wrong land. She's the reason the HOA might get sued. She did this to herself. Karen heard every word. One evening she walked up to Daniel, her voice barely above a whisper. Don't take it from me, she said. Please. Daniel looked at her calmly. It was never yours. A tear slid down her cheek. It was going to be my dream home. Daniel softened, not with sympathy but with truth. You built your dream on someone else's foundation. That's why it collapsed. She closed her eyes in pain. Then she walked away. The mansion is ready. On a warm Friday morning, the foreman approached Daniel with a proud smile. Congratulations, he said. Your home is complete. Daniel looked at the mansion, the sunlight gleaming off new windows, the fresh paint glowing like a promise, the porch inviting and strong. It was beautiful. It was expensive. It was his. And Karen? She was nowhere to be found. Everything was ready for the final showdown. Part 6 would begin with the moment Daniel walks up to the mansion door and Karen makes her last desperate move. The morning the mansion was declared finished, the air felt different, heavy with expectation, like the final page of a long, painful chapter waiting to be turned. Daniel stood across the street, staring at the gleaming structure that had risen from soil once untouched. Fresh paint shone under a soft sunrise glow. Windows reflected the sky like sheets of polished glass, and the stone pathway leading to the front door looked like something out of a high-end real estate magazine. It didn't feel real. It didn't feel possible, yet there it stood, a million-dollar dream home built entirely by mistake. Daniel inhaled deeply as the foreman handed him the final inspection paperwork. It's all yours now, the man said with a proud nod. The house passed every requirement. All yours. 2 words that held the weight of everything he'd endured. The trespassing, the arguments, the threats, the humiliation attempts, the HOA meeting, the legal consultations, the panic, the anger, the quiet determination. Everything, it had all led to this. Daniel thanked the foreman and walked toward the house, each step echoing in the silence. Workers were packing their equipment, chatting casually, unaware of the emotional storm rising inside him. He approached the front door, heart pounding, and placed his hand on the cool metal handle. The moment felt symbolic, not just of ownership, but of justice, of closure, of every time someone underestimated him or assumed he'd back down. He had fought quietly but fiercely, and for once, life had returned something unexpected. Victory. But just as he prepared to turn the handle, he heard the sound of hurried footsteps behind him. Karen. Her breathing was uneven, her face streaked with exhaustion and desperation. She looked nothing like the polished HOA enforcer who once strutted through the neighborhood with a clipboard and authority. Her hair was messy, her clothes rumpled, eyes wild like someone clinging to the last fraying thread of hope. "Stop," she gasped, stumbling toward him. "Don't go in." Daniel turned slowly, calm and composed. "Why not?" She swallowed hard, chest rising and falling rapidly. "Because it's mine," she whispered, voice trembling. "It was supposed to be mine." Daniel shook his head. "Karen, it was never yours." Her face twisted with hurt and anger. "I planned every detail. I picked the tiles, the windows, the layout. I designed it. I fought for it. I made sure every inch reflected the vision I had for this community. For myself," her voice cracked, "you just stood there and watched." "That's all I had to do," Daniel replied softly. His calmness enraged her. "You tricked me," she screamed. "You let me build it. You let me spend every waking minute planning, working, fighting. You let me believe it would be mine." Tears streamed down her face, raw and broken. "I didn't trick you," he said. "You ignored me. You ignored the law. You ignored every warning sign because you thought you were above everything and everyone." She stared at him, breathing hard. Her voice came out in a whisper. "I did it for the neighborhood." Daniel looked around. "The neighborhood is relieved you're gone." The statement was a dagger. She winced, stepping back slightly as if physically struck. "I gave years to this community," she said weakly. "I kept it perfect. I held standards." You controlled people," Daniel finished. "You bullied them, you made up rules to feel powerful, and then you overreached." Karen wiped her face angrily. "This isn't fair. You didn't earn this house." Daniel stepped closer. "And you didn't own the land you built it on." She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Silence filled the air, thick and heavy. Karen's eyes darted toward the house, lingering on its expensive fixtures, its grand porch, its beautiful architecture. She looked like someone watching their entire identity crumble. She had poured money, time, ego, dreams, and blood pressure into this mansion. It was meant to be her crowning achievement. Now it stood as a monument to her greatest failure. "Don't take it," she whispered, almost pleading. "Please, I'll pay you, I'll give you anything, just don't take this from me." Daniel stared at her, not with cruelty, but with the calm clarity of someone who had reached the end of a long, painful road. "I'm not taking anything from you," he said. "You gave it willingly, you just didn't realize it." Her shoulders sagged, her strength draining away. She let out a weak, defeated sob as she sank onto the stone steps. "What am I supposed to do now?" she whispered. Daniel didn't answer. It wasn't his responsibility to fix the damage she'd created. For years she had ruled the HOA with fear, arrogance, and manipulation. She had hurt people, pushed boundaries, violated rights, and when she finally reached too far, everything she built collapsed under the weight of her own pride. He gently stepped around her and faced the mansion door again. This time no one stopped him. He turned the handle. It opened with a soft click. Sunlight poured in through the massive windows, illuminating the sleek interior, polished marble floors, clean walls, elegant lighting. The air smelled new, fresh, filled with possibility. Daniel stepped inside slowly, each footstep echoing through the empty halls. He walked through the spacious living room, stunned by its beauty. High ceilings, designer lighting, a fireplace modern enough to be in a luxury magazine. He ran his fingers along the smooth countertop in the kitchen, the gleaming stainless steel appliances, the imported backsplash Karen had chosen with such pride. He climbed the stairs, hands sliding along the glossy railing. He entered the master bedroom, huge and bright, with tall glass doors that opened onto a balcony overlooking the neighborhood. He stepped outside. From the balcony, he could see the entire community, a place he once viewed with distance, now connected to him in the most unexpected way. Below, he saw Karen still sitting at the steps, staring blankly at the ground. A woman who had finally met her limit, a queen without a kingdom. Daniel took a slow breath. Justice didn't always roar. Sometimes it arrived quietly. Sometimes it came wrapped in calmness and truth. When he finally walked back downstairs, Karen didn't look up. Her shoulders were shaking quietly, a silent storm she could no longer hide. She had built herself a cage of rules and authority, and now she sat broken at the doorway of the house she lost. Daniel paused beside her. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't vindictive. He simply said the truth she needed to hear. "Karen, this was never about the house. It was about control, and you lost it." She didn't answer. She couldn't. He stepped past her, walked down the driveway, and called a locksmith. By the time the locksmith arrived, a small group of neighbors had gathered at a distance, whispering, watching, stunned. Karen didn't move from her place on the steps. She watched in disbelief as the locksmith drilled, replaced, and refitted the locks on the front door. When the locksmith handed Daniel the new set of keys and said, "All yours," something inside Karen finally shattered. Her eyes broke. Her spirit wilted. Her reign ended. Daniel slipped the keys into his pocket, thanked the locksmith, and turned toward the crowd. They watched him with admiration, relief, and a hint of pride. Someone clapped, another joined. Soon the whole group applauded, not for the house, but for what Daniel had done. He had stood up to the unstoppable. He had defeated the unshakable. He had won against the unbeatable. As Daniel walked back toward his mansion, he looked back one last time. Karen was gone, and Willowbrook Lane, for the first time in years, felt peaceful. Daniel stepped inside his new home, closed the door behind him, and finally allowed himself to breathe. The fight was over. The land was his. The mansion was his. And somehow, against all odds, justice had built him a dream he never expected to own.